Major airline CEOs testify to Congress after editing out the senators talking about how great they are for literally 3 hours. What's left is 25 minutes of actual questions and answers. Enjoy.
The fact that the United States acted quickly and continually built on that showed the difference in what we were able to restore for aviation travel. To look specifically over that same time period in the various months, again, where we are today, you can see it's more people have started to catch up where the United States is. But during this time period, the United States was able to move faster. That meant a lot to our economy. It meant a lot to those families and to the workers. And the fact that as of September 2021, airlines were only 8% under their pre-pandemic levels. So we know that this means good news for the future. With the market demand collapsing at record speed, bottoming out at nearly 5% of pre-pandemic levels within weeks, the payroll support program provided a degree of confidence and certainty in the marketplace. We know the PSP program worked because U.S. airlines kept frontline workers employed and were able to capture the air rebound that I just showed in those charts. In January 2021, the U.S. domestic passenger volumes were at 42% of pre-pandemic levels, and by last week, they were at 87%. This is a 107% increase in domestic airline capacity in 2021 and indicates domestic travel could be fully back by 2022.
We at American Airlines are deeply grateful for the pandemic assistance we received through the CARES Act and the Payroll Support Program. We're extremely appreciative of everyone who made it possible, including the members of this committee. You showed leadership at a time that it was needed most, and you demonstrated a commitment to our industry and our team members that made a lasting impact. I want to state it succinctly and unequivocally, the Payroll Support Program has been an overwhelming success. American Airlines fought hard for the CARES Act and the subsequent extensions of PSP, and we did so in close partnership with lawmakers from both parties and in lockstep with our labor union partners. PSP shows what can be accomplished through bipartisanship and compromise. And all those who were involved in crafting the program deserve a great deal of credit, with an overall operational performance this year that is as good or better than before the pandemic. Not only has American performed well, we've done so while growing back at an unprecedented pace. We grew by an industry-leading 82% from the first quarter to the second quarter of this year, and we are providing significantly more service to the flying public than any of our competitors.
From an employment perspective, we've already hired more than 5,000 people this year into careers with high pay and benefits, and expect to hire approximately 10,000 more next year. And for our communities, United is the leading global airline in the fight against climate change. We're leading in sustainable aviation fuels, electric aircraft, and hydrogen aircraft, just to name a few. And at United, we partnered with the Cleveland Clinic as our expert partner, but we also partnered with DARPA and the Department of Defense back in May of last year. There was a great story about why is United Airlines airplanes flying circles out over the Atlantic Ocean, and it was because the Department of Defense was testing the airflow on airplanes. And the conclusion of that is that effectively anywhere that you're going to be indoors, the airplane is the safest place that you can be indoors. It's because of the air filtration.
Safer than a theater, safer than a
Far safer than a theater. Safer actually than an intensive care unit, because we have HEPA grade filters, but we filter the air 20 to 30 times an hour, and a typical ICU is 2 to 3 times an hour. Aircraft are a remarkably safe environment. The takeaway that I remember most is that being next to someone on an airplane, sitting next to them, is the equivalent of being 15 feet away from them in a typical building.
Now, let me ask you this, Mr. Kirby. Do you think your airline's better than Mr. Lauder's, Mr. Kelly's, and Mr. Parker's?
Well, of course I do. I think we've all done the same thing for safety.
Mr. Kelly, on the air quality, and Mr. Parker, would both of you briefly comment on that? And will we ever, do you think, be able to get on an airplane without masks?
The statistics I recall is 99.97% of airborne pathogens are captured by the HEPA filtering system, and it's turned over every 2 or 3 minutes. We use UT Southwestern and Stanford School of Medicine, so we just add to this prestigious list. But yeah, I think the case is very strong that masks don't add much, if anything, in the air cabin environment. It's very safe and very high quality compared to any other indoor setting.
Mr. Parker?
I concur. The aircraft is the safest place you can be. That's true of all of our aircraft. They all have these HEPA filters and the same airflow.
I think that that's probably for the medical community to decide rather than me, but so it is important to recognize that the safe, controlled environment on the plane is a layered safety protocol, which includes the sanitation of the aircraft, it includes the service procedures, it includes the HEPA filtration that are not on all aircraft, by the way, and it includes everyone wearing the masks.
So the filtration system is different from airline to airline, or from aircraft?
From aircraft to aircraft. So not all aircraft have the HEPA filtration.
Older planes may not.
The flights that you take to Mississippi, for example.
They're the best.
They're the best. They're the best.
Mr. Kelly, that's what you told me.
But
On your Southwest flights.
Mr. Lauder.
okay, on your Southwest flights, I don't want to get in the middle of that. But what I will tell you is we absolutely look forward to the day.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our panel for being here today. Inflation is up 6.8% year over year, accelerating at its fastest pace in almost 40 years. Americans across the country are feeling the pain of increased costs of goods with higher prices, from a carton of milk to a gallon of gasoline. As airline executives, what inflationary factors are most concerning to your companies as we move into 2022, and will these factors impact airfare?
Inflation is real. It is a concern. At the same time, if you look at airfares, the inflation-adjusted airfares have been trending down for decades, and certainly have been trending down since 2014. So we're doing our best to hold the line in terms of airfare inflation.
And we appreciate that they were trending down, but I believe now they're going to be trending up. And how long do you think that will last?
Well, obviously we compete. So well, I'm not speaking for the industry, but we're low cost, we're low fare, we don't charge bag fees, we don't charge change fees, so we're going to do our best to be America's leading low fare carrier going forward.
Mr. Kirby.
I would echo what both these gentlemen have said. Fuels are highest, are most volatile, and most susceptible to inflation. Another one that I would add is airports. A lot of airports had lower revenues as there were fewer flights around the country, and so some of the airport and fees for air navigation are going up. Those are probably the highest in a percentage increase. And we'd hope, we're working to, and hopefully will, get ways to moderate those, because it's the last thing, obviously, we and our people need. And then the third one is what Gary said, which is, all of the support services around aviation are feeling pressure, whether, it's everything, whether it's people to fuel airplanes or security, airport workers in restaurants. And all of that tends to flow through to us, whether they have the contractual right or not. Our vendors will say, we either are going to go out of business or you're going to have to pay us more, because we simply can't hire people. So it's mostly about hiring people in those kinds of jobs.
And I would just want to emphasize the point of returning to our full scale as being the best thing that we can do to combat these inflationary pressures. I think that, as I mentioned earlier, getting international open, keeping it open, and continuing to restore our full network is going to be the #1 thing that we can do.
When you look at the energy costs that you're facing here, fuel costs, and when you're looking at pressure and trying to have enough employees as you're building up your flights again, how is that going to affect your economic outlook for 2022?
For Delta, we continue to hire. We've hired about over 8,000 people this year, and that's a key part of getting back to that return that we're talking about. We, at my company, see our recovery continuing through 2022 and into 2023. And that, I think the question there will be, when do the international markets fully reopen? We continue to regain that scale through the course of 2022.
Mr. Kirby, I thought I'd start with you, just because you've had such a busy year. Partnership with Boom Supersonic, based in Colorado, which is will allow United to procure supersonic aircraft using sustainable aviation fuel. And then you were on that first flight from Chicago to DC with 100% sustainable aviation fuel in one engine, which somehow seems out of balance to me to this day. And then also your investment in the middle of just a week ago, or less than a week ago, in hydrogen electric engines for regional aircraft flights. I commend you for the initiative that you're showing. But recognizing the damage done by COVID and the pandemic, how will airlines like United be able to continue to pursue climate ambitions amidst, the economic recovery? Is that something that should be of great concern?
Yeah. My answer to, how can we do it is we don't have a choice. We have to do it first and foremost because it's the right thing to do for the planet. But at some point also, either our customers, our shareholders, our regulators, the legislative branch are going to force us to do it because it is the right thing to do. And this industry, because it's hard to decarbonize, needs to start making the seed investments to build that foundation. It's the reason that I think the blender's credit is so important. To me, doing for aviation, what we need to do is run the same playbook that we ran as a country, as a globe, for wind and solar 20 years ago. Wind and solar were uneconomic 20 years ago, but here, there were credits, there was support, there was certainty for the industry. It drove massive investment. They came down the cost curve, built economies of scale, and it's now cheaper to produce power with wind and solar than it is with fossil fuels. We need to run that same playbook. We know the playbook that works, and what's the current blender's tax credit, really will drive the kind of investment that we need, because we estimate $250 billion of investment to get the global aviation industry to 10% SAF. This will be what kickstarts and drives the start of that private investment to make that happen. There has been a looming pilot shortage for the last decade in the United States, and going through COVID, it became an actual pilot shortage. So all of us, particularly our regional partners, simply don't have enough airplanes to fly. We have almost 100 airplanes effectively grounded right now, regional aircraft, because there's not enough pilots to fly them, which means we just can't, at the moment, fly to all the small communities that we would like to. It's really about not having enough pilots. I'm a little less optimistic that that situation is going to reverse itself in the near term unless we do something to increase the supply of pilots. At United, we've bought and have our first an academy called Aviate Academy. We had our first class start on Monday of this week with 30 people, 79% of them diverse, also another opportunity. These are 30 people that have no flight experience that are going to get the opportunity to become pilots, and if they pass all the certification and all the tests, can become commercial airline pilots at the end of the program. We're going to need a lot more programs like that. The country's going to need thousands of pilots.
And is that a function primarily of just more aggressive recruiting?
No, it's really a function of the problem to become a pilot, particularly at the 1,500-hour rule, is you need to spend $150,000, and that's typically not eligible for government loans like other. If you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, you can get loans and go to school. If you want to be a commercial airline pilot, you can't do that, even though your career earnings are higher and we need those people. So creating ways that they can finance and fund their ability to get the requisite training is really the foundation. And I think it's the only way we're going to solve this problem for small communities, because I expect it's going to get worse before it gets better. We have to have a higher supply of pilots, and we just don't have enough today. And the issue, though, is not really about economics. If it is, it's about economics for individuals who are deciding on their careers when they get out of college or when they're wherever and deciding, do I go to law school or do I go to become a commercial airline pilot? And historically, we've never been involved in training pilots because a lot of them came out of the military or through other sources. And now the demand that we have for pilots simply exceeds the supply. So we're starting our Aviate Academy. We've begun to start training pilots. But I don't know that we're going to be, it's not what we've historically done. Our goal is to train 500 pilots a year. That's, we're going to be hiring 2,000 to 3,000 a year. So it's even a small percentage of what we're hiring at United. And so I think we probably need something broader. As much as we like getting EAS money when we fly to markets, I'd much rather take those funds and put them into the infrastructure to create training for pilots and to build a robust pipeline that makes it easy for people with an aptitude and a desire to be a commercial airline pilot, to get the training, to get the skills that they need. I would like to focus on giving them better training than they've gotten in the past so that they come out more like a military trained pilot than somebody who's, hasn't been through that path. And I think there's an opportunity to make our system safer, better, create great jobs, and fix the supply problem. But the supply problem isn't going to get fixed in the short term because it takes time to get through the process to become a commercial airline pilot.
So resources to support pilot education and training.
Correct.
Is the request.
Yeah.
Mr. Kirby, I want to come to you first. In November, Bloomberg published a piece on how United Airlines is leading the charge on implementing President Biden's unconstitutional vaccine mandate. U.S. District Judge Mark Pittman stated that you expressed, and I'm quoting, skepticism and apparent disdain for any religiously motivated exemption request. So what we're finding out, and I've got a Tennessean that is in this group, I represent the state of Tennessee, that there are individuals that were denied, that all of your religious exemptions were denied. So we're also finding out about their pay having been cut at the time that that exemption was filed. So before they filed the exemption, did you inform these workers that they were not going to be paid even if they applied for a religious exemption?
Well, thank you, Senator. And first, we did implement a vaccine requirement at United Airlines. We did it in August before there were any before there were any requirements from any one direction or the other. We did it purely as the right thing to do for safety, and I'm happy to explain why if you'd like. But we did it purely for safety and did it well before any federal requirements. I think you got some perhaps incorrect information. We accepted about 80% of the religious requests. So 80% of the religious requests were accepted.
Okay, but the other 20% that you did not accept, were they made aware that they would not be paid, even though they were working while their request was being considered, that they would not be paid when that was denied?
So we notified people, anyone whose request was, the 20% who did not get a religious exemption, we gave them notification and gave them approximately 35 days from that date to get vaccinated if they wanted to. And they were fully paid for that entire time. And to my knowledge, almost all of them chose to get vaccinated instead of leave the company.
So how many employees were fired? Do you want to clarify that for the record?
So we got 99.7% of our employees vaccinated, which for a workforce in the United States of just under 70,000 means that about 200 people chose to leave the company.
Well, it seems like you're all talking about needing employees, so it seems like you also would be able to find a workaround on this for people who either have had COVID, don't want the vaccine, cannot take the vaccine. I've talked to so many people who medically have been advised, do not get vaccinated because they have a complex medical issue.
I'd like to start with Mr. Kirby. Do you respect your employees' religious beliefs?
Absolutely.
Do you think it's, so here's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing the same thing in Florida. You've got a lot of people that work for your company many, many years, and they've been placed on unpaid leave after being granted a religious exemption to the vaccine mandate. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act prohibits employment discrimination based on religion, yet your company has placed employees who decline to receive the COVID vaccine based on their sincerely held religious beliefs on unpaid leave. So number one, if you respect their religious beliefs, how can you just put somebody out of work? On top of that, do you believe you're currently in compliance with Title VII of the Civil Rights Act?
So first, Senator, I think it's important to explain our policy, actually, which is we've offered everyone an accommodation where they can still work in an area where they're not interacting with customers and people frequently. So for we've got about 2,000 employees that have either a medical or religious exemption. majority of those are working in positions like agent on demand, where they work virtually on the ramp, where they're outside and don't work with other customers. And we're letting people do that. They have to test, and there's a bunch of requirements around testing. So we're doing that. The exception to that is in places where they're with other employees and they're with customers, so customer-facing roles. The biggest area are pilots and flight attendants, and we will let them take one of the other jobs. But if they want to be pilots or flight attendants, and the flip side of this equation is safety is our #1 priority. We absolutely respect their religious rights, but safety is our #1 priority. And if you're going to be sitting in a cockpit with someone, and not just in a cockpit, you're going to spend 4 days with that person, traveling to and from the crew bus at night and having breakfast with them and dinner with them. The safety of the employees that they work with also comes to bear and comes to mind. And so that's the reason. And we look forward to the day when the COVID pandemic is enough in the rearview mirror that everyone can return to work, vaccinated or unvaccinated. But until they can do that safely, and safely for all the employees, that's the accommodation that they have. They can't work in those customer-facing jobs like pilot or flight attendant, and that we absolutely are compliant with all the legal requirements.
So why couldn't you just make them test every day? I mean, other companies are doing this. I mean, you're not the only company doing this. It's not just the airline industry. I mean, you can buy, tests pretty cheaply now.
Yeah, Senator, it's not about expense. It really is about safety. And aviation has a history of being, I would say, 2 standard deviations better on safety than any other industry. And at United, that is core to our DNA, and we just don't compromise on safety. When we had an issue with our 777s, 52 wide-body airplanes, with an engine issue, we voluntarily grounded the entire fleet. I mean, that is a massively expensive decision to make. But we did it for safety because it's the right thing to do. And that is not just our North Star, it's the only star that guides us on our vaccine policies, is about safety. And testing is good, but it's not as good as someone being vaccinated, because you have a point in time, even if you're testing every day, where you can infect someone else before you show up positive. And these are people that were with each other literally for days in a row. And because we don't compromise on safety, we've done everything we can to find opportunities for them, but those kinds of places where they have to be around other customers and each other for multiple days, we're not allowing that because of safety.
So all of us up here, we're a fiduciary to the taxpayer. We gave your industry $54 billion, and we didn't do it for every industry. There are a lot of small businesses that didn't get a dime, and you guys did. You got a lot of money. So can each of you tell us, are we going to get a return? Are the taxpayers of this country, when you think about, you guys all entered into an agreement with the U.S. Treasury, are we going to make money off this investment? Because we're a fiduciary, that's our job.
Well, I guess I'll start since I'm on the mic. I think that the country is already getting the return. The return is less a financial return of buying a stock and having it go up. The return is about what we do for the U.S. economy, what we did for humanitarian relief efforts, carrying hundreds of millions of vaccines, supporting relief efforts at the beginning of the pandemic, bringing 13,000 refugees home from Afghanistan, repatriating 18,000 Americans that got stranded overseas. The return is what we do for the economy.
Did you get paid for that? Those flights?
Some of those we did, but most of those flew, especially the repatriation flights and things, flew at losses because there weren't enough passengers. A lot of those were just commercial airline passengers, and we've lost, it's hard to add up, billions of dollars in the last year and a half doing those kinds of things. But what you did was allowed us to keep flying and keeping those airlinks alive. We weren't making money on them, but the support that we got from Congress, and thank you for it, allowed us to keep those bridges intact, and we could do it because you were helping fund it.
My next question is for Mr. Kirby. Earlier this month, United opened the United Aviate Academy, a state-of-the-art pilot training center at Phoenix Whittier Airport. How will this training center bring economic opportunity to Goodyear and provide flight training opportunities for individuals from communities that have been traditionally underrepresented in the cockpit?
Well, thank you, Senator. And we've talked a lot today in this hearing about the need to create a new pipeline for training pilots. And so we're excited to be the first U.S. airline to have our own training academy for pilots there in Arizona. And what we're going to do, our first class started this week of 30 students. None of them had flight experience before today. And they'll get training and they'll get the opportunity to have training that is very similar to what military training is, where they'll fly aerobatics and they'll learn they'll fly in crowded airspace. They'll have a very robust training program. That group of people is 79% people of color. Today, at United Airlines, only women are people of color. Today at United Airlines, only 19% of our pilots are women or people of color, and to the best of my knowledge, we have the highest level of any airline in the country. That's because there have been historical barriers to entry for women and people of color. There just aren't as many pilots out there. So we're going to create and be able to start training the next generation of pilots. We're going to be able to train them better, but we're also going to be able to have a diverse group of people, and we expect to be putting 500 new pilots through that facility every year. We're excited about it. Hope it can become a template for the rest of aviation, but also for other jobs around the economy, to create training programs where people can get careers and have careers, which helps rebuild the middle class in this country.